My name is Vic Roberts. I'm a general practitioner in Hastings. Both my parents were born in New Zealand, and I was born in Wellington and grew up there. I went to medical school in Auckland and graduated eventually in 1983. I then spent most of my working life in Hawke's Bay, initially at Napier Hospital and later at the working in general practice and working part-time in the Hastings Psychiatric Unit. I've also worked in other places, including Australia and Northland. Today I'm talking about men, depression and suicide, and this is a subject that I have become deeply concerned about. Suicides cost this country $1.4 billion every year. And here's a picture, here's a graph put out by the SPINS organisation in Christchurch, mainly run by a researcher called Annette Beautray. And you'll see on this picture the men are in the black lines, the women are in the grey lines, and at each age men outnumber women significantly, overall to the tune of 3 men for every 1 woman ended in suicide. Men are 9 times more likely to commit suicide following a relationship breakdown than they are at any other time, and that's information again from Annette Beautray in Christchurch. From this we can say that 90% of male suicides follow relationship breakdown. I do not believe men are distraught about losing their relationship. I believe they are distraught about the treatment they get in the family court. And I believe the family court is the prime driver of this 90% of male suicide. Now, of course, we can't do research about that because everything that happens in the family court is suppressed, and so we cannot know whether a man has been through the family court or not. All we can say is this man has had a relationship breakdown. Depression is a major problem for men in this country, and I think there is insufficient research into the causes. In my work, I repeatedly see men who are significantly depressed, and I have to do what I can for them, and that means doing my best to make sense of what is happening for them. What I'm about to tell you is simply unbelievable, and for those men going through it, they also think there must be something wrong here. They must have misunderstood what's happening. What is life all about? Well, for many men, life is about their children and their family. These are my 2 children some years ago, and for me, they have been a significant driver of my reason for going to work, my reason for continuing to bother. The typical depressed man that I see has an experience that goes something like this. There are, of course, wide variations, but this is the basic pattern. One day he comes home to find that his wife and children are gone, and he's had little reason to expect that. When he looks back some years later, he can sometimes see there were things to indicate that this was coming, but at the time he has no awareness that this was about to happen. There's a variation on that theme, and that is he may arrive home to find himself served with an order preventing him from going into his home. Typically in that situation there will be a bailiff there, and he will have perhaps a quarter of an hour to get some basic necessities like his clothing from the house, but then he won't be able to return. best estimates that I can find are that 70 to 75% of relationship breakdowns are initiated by the woman, and the vast majority of those circumstances, the woman would not have been granted a divorce under the previous divorce laws. For instance, there has been no infidelity, no violence, no obvious reason. The next thing that happens is the man finds that he is unable to have access or even contact his children. And that order called a temporary protection order will often be granted ex parte, which means that the man has no opportunity to make a submission to the judge or even understand that this order is about to happen before it does happen. The man may even be accused of sexually abusing his children. The family court, once the temporary protection order is in place, the family court will treat this man as violent with very little chance of him ever demonstrating that he is not violent. There's variation on this theme, and that is that sometimes the man is a victim of a significant assault by his partner, and sadly, when that is the case, this event usually goes unreported. If a man does try and seek some form of protection order against his partner, the most likely outcome of that is that he will have a protection order served on him. This is because the police will investigate his claim of violence, and the police will believe the partner when she says, "No, I'm not violent, he is." The norm has been that it takes several months for a protection order hearing to come to court, and that's anywhere from 2 months up to perhaps 18 months in my experience. Supposedly it's getting better since the change of the law in July 2005. However, that isn't borne out by the local experience in Hawke's Bay. In this situation, this man will descend into despair and depression, and often these guys can't manage continuing at work the way they did before. Many of these men will end up living in their car or sleeping on a friend's couch or a rundown caravan park. As far as I know, there's only one emergency accommodation for separated men in this country, and that's a single house in Manurewa. The woman will normally go on to a domestic persons benefit, and IRD child support will work very hard to recover the child support payments from this man. Even when this man has reports from a doctor and a psychiatrist, the IRD can arbitrarily assign him an income figure and charge him child support payments on the rate of that assigned figure, even when he has a psychiatrist report stating that he is not able to work at his previous capacity. When there's been a protection order in place for some time, often the first step towards seeing the children is supervised visitation, and the court will often suggest that this happens at Bernardo's. Bernardo's will usually charge for the service, and the charges range anywhere from $25 at the bottom up to perhaps $45 per hour at the top. Many men's first instincts on finding themselves thrown out of their home is to consult a lawyer, and this is going to cost them $200 to $300 per hour, and at that rate, even a very simple case can soon mount up to $30,000. There are several instances of men in this country who have spent more than $100,000 and still not achieved very much in terms of seeing their children. So here we have a man who has lost his wife unexpectedly, and I just ask you to think how that would be for a man whose wife had died. He's lost his home, he's lost contact with his children, he has a new enemy that knows all his weaknesses and tender points. He's trying to protect his children from some extremely negative influences. His new enemy is pointing out his weaknesses to his children, and if she's not fabricating weaknesses, then she's at least magnifying the weaknesses that he has to the children. He's fighting a well-honed legal clobbering machine that treats him as guilty with little chance of ever proving his innocence. He's lost a large chunk of his money and is facing mounting legal bills. And he has IRD child support on his back, telling him that he can earn more than he knows that he realistically can. This is a picture of, I'm changing track a little bit here, this is a picture of what happens to you when you go through a loss of some sort. And the classic one is your partner dying. The first step is that you go into a shock and denial state. You just refuse to believe that this thing has happened to you. The classic example of this is your friend dies, you go along to the funeral, and you're sitting at the funeral looking around and thinking, all this person's friends are here, why isn't this person here? Oh yes, they are here, they're in the box. That's the first stage, and that lasts a few days. You then go into the second phase of post-shock awareness, and this is characterised by a lot of emotion. Anger, bargaining, where you're thinking, if only I'd been nicer to this person, or if only I had done this or that, or if only the doctor had done this or that, then this person would still be alive. And that phase lasts a few weeks. Then the next stage is that you get into a depression and despair, really an emptiness. And that phase lasts months. Eventually you will come out the other side, and that we're really talking about 1 or 2 years. Now this is a normal human response and healthy human response to any loss situation. These phases don't happen one by one and one after the other, they tend to merge from one to the other. This is the Dr. Roberts simplified version of how your brain works. And you start off with your thoughts in one nerve, it goes to the next nerve, then to the next one, then to the next one, and meets up with a block. You then go back to the beginning and start to think it through again, and meet the block, and round in circles you go. And all of us have done that at times of stress, lying in bed with our thoughts going around, wishing we could turn them off. The way your nerves communicate with each other is at one nerve ending you have a little bubble of chemical that goes across from one nerve to the next, and on receiving that bubble of chemical the next nerve fires off. Now as your thoughts go round and round, you start to, two things happen. You start to get too much of this chemical building up in these synapses, and that forces this nerve to fire off more quickly. At the same time, you start to run out of this bubble, these bubbles of chemical to send across to the next nerve for the next time you want to send a message, and so you haven't got the wherewithal to send the message next time. So that you are simultaneously going too fast and too slow. We all have several things going on in our minds all the time. We have our primary set of thoughts that we're working through. We have another part of our brain telling us how to breathe, another part telling us how to work our hands. And we have another part which is a monitoring system that looks in on top of those thoughts and asks the question, is this thought reasonable? And so we're always asking ourselves and checking that what we're saying is correct and what we're thinking is correct. As you start to run out of neurotransmitter, one of the things that goes relatively early is this monitoring system, so that you lose the ability to decide whether you're being reasonable or not. One of the things I do to help people who are depressed is use medication, and I use one medication that slows the passage of this neurotransmitter across the synapse to slow things down. I also give them a medication that helps this chemical build up back in the synapse so that they can send their next message. So simultaneously speeding people up and slowing them down. Kiwis, as a rule, are somewhat reluctant to consider using medication. I had a time in Australia, and over there I frequently had people coming along to see me saying, I'm feeling a bit low, doc, give me a pill. And out of that I gave quite a few people medication that I wouldn't previously have given medication to. And I was surprised to find that a lot of those people really did benefit from it. As a rule, New Zealanders are reluctant to accept medication, and I think we do need to work towards that being seen as a more normal event. Sometimes people get, well, eventually, when people get low enough, they will say to me, well, I'll do whatever you think best, doctor. And so many people will eventually accept tablets. Sadly, often people have to get quite low before they'll do that. I want to leave that part of the talk there, and we're going to go on to something else. So, here we have this man, depressed, forced by IRD child support to work to a degree beyond what he is capable of. This is a definition from the encyclopedia on the internet of slavery. Slavery is a condition in which one person is under the control of another. Slavery almost always occurs for the purpose of securing labour or sexual availability of the slave. There is a specific form of slavery, known as chattel slavery, where one person outright owns another one. However, that is not so common. This is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which says no one shall be held in slavery or servitude, and that slavery and the slave trade will be prohibited in all their forms. I put it to you that men in this situation are effectively in slavery. This is a picture of how many men view their actions. This picture is deliberately fuzzy, and here we have a mother who is about to strike the baby, little child, and we have the man sitting here prevented from knowing what's happening so that he can't see, and yet forced to supply her with her daily needs, in this case a bottle of wine for her luxury while she abuses the children. When confronted with this situation, men will think through all their options, and virtually all of them will consider suicide, murder or other significant harm to their partner, ex-partner, some form of action against the law or court or government, and I have one friend who keeps talking about driving a tank through the front door of Parliament. Some men take the option of just doing what they're told, but of course in the process they lose their self-respect. There are a variety of endpoints for men. but some of the common ones are permanently reduced contact with their children, suicide, imprisonment, personal estrangement from their children, and I personally know many men who haven't seen their children for 7 years or longer. Permanent loss of previous employment status, earning capacity, and of course many end up addicted to alcohol or other drugs. I want to stop there for a minute and talk about what happens for the children when a couple divorce. Now, of course, in the best scenarios, the children are not too badly affected, but every child of separated parents wants their parents to at least get on together. Entry to the family court effectively guarantees a poor outcome, or at least a poorer outcome for the children. The way things work for the children is first they become aware that something isn't right between their parents. Then one parent moves out of the house, and that's nearly always father. When there is a protection order, which is most of the time, the children won't see dad at all. They won't get phone calls, birthday presents, Christmas presents. As far as they know, he's dropped off the face of the earth. The next thing that happens is a new man shifts in, and at best the children will feel divided loyalties to their mother and their father, and they will be reluctant to accept this person. This also applies to stepmother, of course. In some instances, this new partner will be unpleasant to the children or even violent. And we've had several high-profile cases of children ending up dead. Newman and Newman, as long ago as 1996, said we have the most underfathered generation in the Western world. And let me tell you, in the 10 years since that time, things have only got worse. This is a little roll call of children who you will immediately recognise. James Buckaroo, little boy from Hastings, 2 girls from Palmerston North. The roll call is an indictment on family law in New Zealand. In all of these cases, the parents were separated, the children were in the custody and care of their mother. The family court won't allow us to know, but I'm confident the fathers had a protection order against them which prevented the father from intervening on the children's behalf. This is from the Auckland Herald in October 2004. Enraged by the tortured death of his daughter, Peter Lafa'ili went into prison intent on revenge. He committed an aggravated robbery so he could be remanded in Mount Eden prison alongside his daughter's killer, Eddie Smith. He got within a metre of lashing out at him, halted only by an alert guard. 13 years later, Mr. Lafa'ili, a natural father of Delcelia Whitaker, is still full of the anger and frustration he had when he hatched his plot. He says, I want him locked up for the rest of his life because I know what I'm capable of. That's not a threat or anything. It's just that this wasn't a car accident. He tortured her to death. That's this little girl here. That's her father. If you're thinking that that roll call of children is somewhat outdated, here's some more recent ones. This guy threatened to fly a plane into the Sky Tower on election night. And of course it's reported that he's looking for lost love. Now, it's my bet that he was prevented from seeing his kids by the family court, but the family court won't allow us to know that because that's suppressed. This is a sad story of a guy that did lose contact with his kids, lost the plot, and murdered his ex-partner. This is the ex-partner's father, and the guy himself ended up in hospital. It's not clear to me. It seems that he may have tried to commit suicide after he killed her and her new boyfriend. I want to talk for a minute about child abuse. In every study, everywhere in the world, there is one person above all others who is the prime child abuser, and that is stepmother, mother's partner, stepfather, mother's partner. There's others on the list. They include mother, father, grandparents, brothers, uncles, next door neighbours, and so on. But nobody even comes close to stepfather. Now, we would have to say, looking at the experience in New Zealand in the last few years, that the most dangerous place for a child of separated parents is the mother's home. Here's another one for you. This is mother. Her and her boyfriend killed the baby. This is father, and he says, gee, I really wanted to look after that baby. Why was baby allowed to be with her? Here's another lady, killed her baby. This lady and her partner didn't quite manage to kill their baby. They almost killed him, took him up to hospital saying that it had been some sort of accident. We don't have good research in this country, but this is a study from the US of 275 children who were killed at home. The mothers killed 24 children to every one killed in the father's home. What's the other endpoints for children? Well, ADD, absent dad disorder, self-harm and suicide, petty crime, gang involvement. Some kids end up okay. I know a man who's got a son who's 8 years old who has recently been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Asperger's syndrome is perhaps a little short of autism and worse than attention deficit disorder. Now, of course, that diagnosis happened with this child in mum's care. Dad says that when the child comes to his home, the problem behaviours all but disappear. Long-term depression for kids, problems holding down a job, alcohol and drug problems. The number one predictor for children committing suicide is living in a mother-only home. And that's study from USA, a little bit old now, but that is the most recent study that I'm aware of. And living in a mother-only home being the number one risk factor is true across age, income bracket, race and religion. Just a little cartoon of what kids think when their parents talk the other one down. If you can't read that, mum is saying, your father was a jackass. I want to take a hypothetical case of Jack and Jill, who have been married for 3 years. Jack is abusive and regularly beats Jill up and the children, and Jill finally gets sick of that and leaves. Another case of Sally and Sam, who've been married for 7 years, and Sally feels that she has developed differently from Sam and feels it's time to move on. Both cases go to the family court over the care of the children, and children are placed in the custody of the mother in both cases, and the father has a temporary protection order placed on them. Now, Jill gets together with Sam, Jack gets together with Sally. Jack and Jill's kids might be better off, but though Jack is prevented from seeing his own children, there's nothing to stop him beating up Sally and Sam's kid. If Sam tries to protect his children from Jack, he is likely to end up in prison. And I believe this is exactly the situation that confronted Coral Burrows. Coral Burrows was murdered by his stepfather, and he had a long list of convictions. Again, we don't know, but it's my belief that her father was prevented from intervening on Coral's behalf. Why is our system that way? Why is our system that way? I'm coming around to that. Let's have a look at what society thinks about men and women. You may remember this coming out on a t-shirt, or maybe you've seen this on a girl's t-shirt. Friends are forever, boys are whatever. Or what about this one? All men are potentially dangerous perverts, and children should not be allowed to sit next to them on an airline flight. This is again the United Nations Convention for the Rights of the Child, and it says, in all actions, the interests of the child shall be a primary consideration. The New Zealand Family Court says that also, that the children's needs are the primary consideration, but in practice what happens in the family court is a very long way from that. This is from the Family Law section of the Law Society. For some time, New Zealand has recorded a higher number of child abuse deaths than most OECD countries, yet little change has been effected. One of the things that's been tried is to outlaw corporal punishment. However, a little surprise to me, at the end of that summary they say evidence frequently shows a lack of personal responsibility by the parents. In practice, I think the family court has little interest in actually looking after children's needs and significant investment in following its mantra, and I'll come back to that. I want to talk a little bit about the differences between men and women. By the time you're about 4 years old, you will be aware of the differences between men and women. There are obvious physical differences. There are differences in the way the brain works, and by now most of us have heard of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. There's also differences in social strategies. These next few quotes are taken from a book by Patricia Pearson, and she says, our ability to interpret what's going on is confounded by the advent of, in feminist scholarship, standpoint epistemology. This research framework holds that history must be told from the standpoint of the victim. Here's this book by Patricia Pearson. It's called When She Was Bad, The Violent Woman and the Myth of Innocence, published in 1997. She's since produced another book called How and Why Women Get Away with Murder. On the back of the book, Patricia Pearson is described as a feminist writer. As soon as girls hone their verbal and social skills at around 10 or 11, they become aggressors of a different kind. They abandon physical aggression and instead adopt a new set of tactics. They bully, they name call, they set up and frame fellow kids. They become masters of indirect aggression or indirection. And I think the recent case of a 13-year-old girl committing suicide after text bullying is an example of exactly that. The bullying that she suffered is almost certainly from her peers. Indirect aggression is where a person manipulates circumstances and society or social structure in order to harm the target person without being personally involved in the attack. Here's the clip just recently about this 13-year-old girl that committed suicide. Here's another example on a woman's t-shirt. Tomorrow I'll be sober, but you will still be ugly. The dynamic of domestic violence is not analogous to two differently weighted boxes in a ring. There are relational strategies and psychological issues at work in an intimate relationship that negate the fact of physical strength. At the heart of the matter is which person has the will to harm the other one. This is again Patricia Pearson's words. It's increasingly urgent that our culture acknowledge violence as a human rather than a gendered phenomenon. And perhaps above all, the denial of women's aggression profoundly undermines our attempt as a culture to understand violence, to trace its causes, and to quell them. Women operate the system to their advantage. Donning the feminine mask, they manipulate the basis of family and community in order to set men up. If he doesn't like that and tries to fight back, there comes a fateful moment when she reaches for the phone, dials 911 and says, "Officer, he hit me." Now that's in America. Of course, in New Zealand, all she has to say is, "I'm scared of him." She doesn't even have to say that he's hit her, just that she's scared of him. Once she says that, a temporary protection order will be placed on that man, and that's usually done ex parte, without the man ever having an opportunity to say anything about it. The man then has 5 days to raise objection to that order, and in my experience, men are so shocked and stunned by the arrival of that order that they don't know what to do and completely ignore it, or at least ignore the consequences of that. If they do try and object to this temporary protection order, that will be seen as this man being in denial. Once the order's in place, the law will treat him as though he's guilty without any chance, realistically, of him proving that he's not. Once those 5 days, the first 5 days of the temporary protection order pass, he is then ordered to attend a 13-week course run by Dove or some similar organisation, and that's usually 2.5 hours, one night each week. And if he fails to attend those, he can be imprisoned. He may not contact the children by phone, communicate with them in any way. In my experience, the protection orders will be in force anywhere from about 2 months up to perhaps 18 months. And I put it to you that a child of 2 won't even remember who Dad is after 18 months. Why does the family court do this? Well, on the 4th of February 94, a certain Mr. Bristol in Wanganui decided to end his life and those of his 3 children, then aged 7, 3 and 18 months. He connected the exhaust of his car to the interior and they all died. Mr. Bristol had been granted interim custody of his children. The father's solicitor described him as devoted to his children, just the best. A subsequent inquiry showed that there was no evidence that the father had been violent towards the children, but there was evidence that he was violent against his wife. Now, of course, I have got something to say about that inquiry. Following the deaths, Mrs. Bristol came forward to the authorities and her story was given significant attention in the media. A review was carried out by a guy called Ron Davidson, who recommended changes to the law and the way the law was applied as a result of that case. From that review, he says the deaths of those children were not foreseeable and were not preventable. He then went on to say it's possible for judges to apply the law differently effectively so that violent parents don't get access to their children. Unfortunately, the definition of violent parent is if the mother says he's violent, then he's violent. However, that's one case. and Mrs. Bristol's story was trumpeted in the media. But was Mr. Bristol's side of the story ever told? And I put it to you that the inquiry by Ron Davidson didn't take into account Mr. Bristol's statements because he wasn't there to make them. So I then ask, what kind of a judge would make decisions on the basis of a single case on which they had only ever heard one side of the story? And the extremely sad answer to that question is New Zealand family court judges. That's what kind of a judge. This is the mantra of the family court. They say the most important thing is to ensure that the children are safe. Children are not safe with their father, like the Bristol case. Children are safe with their mother, unless there is conclusive proof to the contrary. And if Dad says the children aren't safe with the mother, then this is evidence that he's a control freak, like Bristol. The Declaration of Human Rights, saying that all people are equal before the law, and all are entitled to equal treatment without discrimination. I just want to finish this part by bringing to your attention a couple of recent cases. This is a case of a man whose children were abducted by their mother and taken to Sweden. The Manukau Family Court declared that the children had been wrongfully removed and ordered them to return. The court in Sweden, a very short time later, also found the children had been abducted and ordered the children to be returned. The father has now been ordered by the New Zealand Family Court to pay the cost of repatriating his children and the mother, but because he's had child support taken out of his wages, significant legal bills, and lost half of his previous finances, he's no longer in a position to fund such a trip. So he's stalemated despite being in the right. And here's another one in the paper just the other day. This is father, this is father's mother, and this is the boyfriend who killed the kid. I'm going to change track a little bit now, and the case of the Washington snipers a couple of years ago. This is John Muhammad, and the young one is John Lee Malvo. This is from the BBC website. Mr. Muhammad is the father of 4 children. He's been married at least twice. He's been through bitter legal battles for custody of his children. Mr. Muhammad divorced Carol Williams, his first wife, some 18 years ago. That'll be 20 years ago now. Interviewed by the Seattle Times, she said she last saw him in August 2002 and described him as outgoing, with a good sense of humour. He wasn't a quiet type, he liked to talk, he liked to mingle with people. She also said he was not a violent man. However, a family court, had awarded one of his ex-wives a permanent restraining order after he allegedly threatened to kill her. And here's the timeline. 4th of September 2001, Muhammad was told he couldn't see his children. 11th of September 2001, the terrorists flew the plane into the building. 21st of September 2002, virtually the first anniversary, was the first of the sniper killings. It took the police there a month to catch him. And I want to just help you understand this. I in no way condone that behaviour. But what happens is first you get angry with your ex-partner, then you get angry with her lawyer, then you get angry with the family court, then you get angry with the people who made the law the way it is, and then you get angry with the people who failed to evict a government that allowed that law to continue. Now, of course, he's not the only one. This little boy in the picture here, you probably remember this from the front page of the paper a couple of years ago. This is Elian Gonzalez. He was a Cuban boy who was awarded, there was a family court case, and he was put in his father's custody. The mother kidnapped him from Cuba and took him to Florida, and I'm not quite sure how, but the mother died, and the US authorities subsequently ordered that Elian be returned to his father in Cuba. The family would not obey that order and took Elian into hiding. Now, if you're a military culture that has a lot of belief in guns and military might, then you go looking for this child with a machine gun. And I hope that we never get into that situation here. But I put it to you, how much injustice can you cope with? And what would you do in the face of unjust law? And I put it to you, you show me a terrorist, and I will show you someone who has had their rights trampled on, or more likely, their children's rights trampled on. That's what makes terrorists. We are seriously hampered in this country in research to understand these problems by the fact that everything that goes through the family court is suppressed. We can't even do prospective studies because once a guy goes into the family court, everything that happens to him is suppressed from then on. The only thing we can look at is, did this guy have a relationship breakdown? Research into family violence is confounded by some things. Firstly, men are less likely to report violence by their female partner to the police. If they do report it, it's less likely to be recorded and acted on, and in some cases the police and courts will deliberately misinterpret actions of men to construe them as violent, and those of women to construe them as less violent. If a man does report violence by his partner, the most likely outcome is that he will be laughed at or suspected of being violent himself. He may even be arrested for violence. Women do commit murder, but of course they don't really mean to. This woman stabbed her partner in the leg. It hit one of the arteries and he died. But she only got 3 years for that murder because she didn't really intend to kill him. This lady killed her husband and got 4 years, 3 months in prison because her husband was violent. Now, of course, she says that, but her husband isn't around to tell his side of the story. This is a lady who's violent, not even to someone who's wronged her. This lady killed her neighbour because the neighbour refused to babysit for her. Here's another one, woman charged after man dies. I know of a guy who was beaten by his wife. The police attended at his request, and they dropped him off in front of the local accident and emergency for treatment, accident emergency department for treatment. They didn't lay any charges against the wife. They didn't make any records. They didn't offer him victim support. Just dropped him off at the door. See you later. Of course, our institutions aren't biased. Yeah, right. Here's one from the Dominion again. SIFS is softer on women than men in child abuse cases. About 10% of protection orders are given to men. Some women are so dangerous that the courts have to pay attention. However, that requires significant amount of evidence. They need to take photographs, witness statements, etc. Let's talk about the Families Commission. We have a wonderful new Families Commission that should help this situation. However, I wrote to the Families Commission and they are not intending to do any research on the effects of the decisions of the Family Court. However, they are doing a study on the effects of the media reporting what happens in the Family Court. How helpful. One of the few bits of research that we do have that's worthwhile is the Dunedin study, and this is a long-running study, prospective study of children that were all born within a year of each other in Dunedin and followed up ever since. And so here's a paper from that study that was published in July 1999 by the US Department of Justice. And 1/3 to 1/5 of the people in that study said they suffered some form of violence in that year. Women who are victims of violence are 10 times more likely to be perpetrators than other women. Men who are perpetrators are 19 times more likely to be victims. In other words, it takes men twice as much victimisation before they become violent. In most cases of violence, both parties are involved. Men know that if they hit their partner, the police are likely to be called and they are likely to act quickly. As a result, it takes men a lot of loss of self-control before they allow that to happen, usually when they've had too much alcohol. Women, on the other hand, know that it is unlikely that their partner will call for help, and if he does call for help, the police are unlikely to intervene. So there is very little to deter an angry woman from hitting her partner. This is from that Dunedin study. Here is the numbers of women who perpetrate violence. Here is the number of men who perpetrate violence. Here's the number of women who are victims. Here's the number of men that are victims. This is a rather complicated thing, looking at what makes you more likely to be a perpetrator or a victim of violence. And one of the obvious ones is a poor attachment with your parents when you're 15. That makes you much more likely to be a perpetrator of violence if you're a woman. Or parents separated at age 3, I think it is. No, here is one parent absent at age 9. Makes you much more likely to be a victim of violence if you're a man. That's readily available on the internet, that study. This is a study, again, that's just come out from Christchurch. 828 men and women by Professor David Ferguson in Christchurch. Men and women are equally violent to each other. The role of the family court in men's problems. I don't think men are particularly distressed by a relationship breakdown. They are distressed by what happens to them in the family court. My biggest concern about the research currently done is that we can't know if the family court is involved or not. Here's a bit more research, this time from the USA. This is a study looking at what they classed as minor violent acts versus severe violent acts. Minor violent acts were slapping someone or throwing something. Severe violent acts were beating your partner up with a beating or kicking them or threatening them with a gun or knife. And here's the results. 1975, minor assaults pretty much equal. 85, minor assaults pretty much equal. 1992, minor assaults relatively equal. But look at severe assaults. Women outnumber men, 75. Women outnumber men, 1985. Women vastly outnumber men, 1992. I don't have more recent research, but I have no reason to believe that that's any different now. This is again from that same study. The wives and husbands report slightly differently whether one has been violent to the other, but effectively the violence is at least equal, if not more so, by the woman. Again, this is a little out of date. In Canada, young women now account for nearly a quarter of all violent offences in their age group. I'd just like to touch on depression in older people because of this spike here that you see in the over 85-year-old men. Partly that is men carrying out euthanasia on themselves when they're given a fatal diagnosis. They will put their affairs in order and commit suicide sometimes, and I'm certainly aware of one prominent Hawke's Bay citizen who has done exactly that not so long ago. The other factor in the older person committing suicide is that these problems with the family court don't go away, and as you get older you think you have less chance of making a difference. So that's my talk on men, depression and suicide. I thank you for listening to me and giving me the opportunity to share these things with you. I'd be most happy to hear any communications from you, and you can contact me at drvivrob@hotmail.com, or my phone number is 06 870 4875. Thank you very much.